5 years ago, $1 million was a number that existed only in books.
My reality was 20 acres of dry earth and a rusted tractor that groaned every time I turned the ignition.
I lived with dirt permanently etched into my fingernails and the constant, dull ache of a spine that had spent too many hours hunched over rows of struggling crops. The barn roof leaked every time the sky turned gray, dripping water onto piles of empty crates. I worked until the sun vanished, sweating through layers of fabric, yet I remained completely invisible to everyone in town. Neighbors walked by without a glance. Merchants ignored my produce. I was just the man who owned the failing land at the edge of the county. Every night I would sit on the porch,
listening to the silence of a house that had nothing to offer. My pockets were empty. My equipment was dying, and my future felt like a locked door. I was a ghost in my own life,
unnoticed and unvalued, waiting for a chance that refused to knock.
I did not know then that the catalyst for my entire life would be something as small and as common as a single bruised tomato. The town festival transformed the square into a sea of light and noise. I stood at the perimeter, clutching the single perfect tomato I had spent months nurturing. It was heavy, cool, and firm.
The only thing of value I possessed. I wiped my palms against my thighs, but they kept sweating. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a dark storefront glass and quickly looked away. I looked out of place.
A man smelling of soil amidst the scent of fried dough and perfume. Then I saw her. Clara was standing near the gazebo, surrounded by people who seemed to exist in a different world. She was laughing at something someone said, her presence drawing the light of the lanterns toward her. I took a breath, the air tasting sharp and cold.
My hands shook as I adjusted my grip on the tomato. I told myself it was just a gesture.
A simple offering of my best work. I stepped forward, pushing through the crowd. Every step felt like walking into a storm. My focus narrowed until there was only the distance between me and her.
I reached the edge of her circle, my throat tight, and waited for her to notice me standing there.
I held the tomato out, my arm steady despite the tremor in my chest. It was bright, polished, and vibrant.
Clara looked down at it, then up at my face. The silence stretched, thin and brittle.
Before she could speak, a hand shoved into my shoulder. Mark stepped into the space between us, his face twisting into a sneer. He glanced at the tomato, then laughed, a sharp, barking sound that cut through the music. "Clara does not want your vegetables, Leo," he announced to the circle. The people around us turned.
A ripple of giggles started, then swelled into a chorus of open mockery. I stood frozen, my hand still extended, the tomato feeling heavier by the second. I looked for Clara, hoping for a flicker of kindness or even annoyance, but she was already turning her back. She walked toward the gazebo, her friends flanking her, their voices rising in shared amusement. The crowd parted for them,
leaving me in the center of the square. The laughter hammered against my ears, rhythmic and cruel. I pulled my hand back, my fingers digging into the skin of the fruit. I stood there as the world moved on around me,
completely invisible once again, holding the only thing I had to offer, now worthless in the cold night air. I walked until the music of the festival faded into the hum of crickets. My boots dragged through the dry dust of my own land. I stopped in the center of the field, the silence here echoing the mockery I had just endured. I looked at the tomato in my hand. It was bruised now.
The skin split where my nails had dug in. I drew my arm back and hurled it into the darkness.
It hit the ground with a dull thud, gone. I did not move for a long time. My chest felt empty. Yet something else was hardening inside me. I would not be a ghost in my own life. The next morning, the sun rose over the leaking barn, but I did not see the rot. I saw potential.
I walked inside and pulled the silver watch from the hook by the door. It had been my grandfather's.
It ticked against my palm, a steady reminder of the past I was about to trade away. I walked into town, found the jeweler, and dropped the watch on the counter. The metal clinked against the glass. I didn't hesitate. I took the cash, walked to the supplier, and bought the first batch of organic seeds. The dirt under my fingernails didn't feel like poverty anymore. It felt like a start. The soil was unforgiving. It clung to my boots like lead, dragging on every step I took across the 20 acres. I spent my days bent double, my spine screaming in protest as I turned the earth with a rusted shovel. My palms blistered, broke, and calloused over, turning into thick leather. When the drought hit in the second month, the ground cracked into deep, jagged fissures. I hauled water buckets from the distant well until my shoulders burned, refusing to let the seedlings wither. Then came the storm. Clouds bruised the sky, and rain fell in heavy, punishing sheets that threatened to wash away the topsoil I had spent weeks cultivating. I stayed out in the downpour, digging drainage trenches with my bare hands, mud coating my face and throat. My body begged for sleep,
for rest, for surrender. But every time I faltered, I heard it again, that sharp,
mocking laughter from the festival. The sound acted like a whip. It forced me to stand, to lift the shovel,
to keep digging. I was not just farming. I was burying the boy who had been laughed at, one stroke of the spade at a time. The work was brutal, but the fire in my chest burned hotter than the exhaustion. The harvest was lean, but vibrant. I pulled the last of the purple carrots from the earth, shaking off the dark soil that had become my life. I carried a single crate into the busiest bistro in the city. The chef, a man known for his sharp tongue and higher standards, stood over the prep table. He picked up a carrot, wiped it with a cloth, and took a bite. He didn't speak. He chewed slowly, looking at the color, then back at me. The silence in the kitchen stretched, heavy with the weight of my gamble. Finally, he looked at his sous chef and nodded. "I want all of it," he said. "Every last pound you have." He didn't just pay the market rate. He paid for the quality I had bled for. That single transaction acted like a stone dropped in a pond. Word of the flavor traveled fast. By the end of the week, 3 other restaurants were calling my phone, demanding the same supply. I stopped being a man struggling in the dirt and became the man who controlled the source. The trucks started arriving at the farm gate before dawn. The cycle of poverty had finally been broken by the very soil that once seemed intent on starving me. The farm transformed into a complex grid of greenhouses and logistics hubs. I stopped holding the shovel and started holding spreadsheets, hiring crews to manage the fields I once worked alone. The trucks multiplied, turning the quiet dirt road into a constant hum of commerce. We supplied the biggest kitchens in the region, the demand becoming a relentless beast that required precision and discipline. My life became a series of negotiations and scaling operations. Yet, I never lost the habit of walking the rows at night. I needed to feel the soil beneath my feet to remember why I started. When my accountant finally walked into my office and laid the report on the desk, the number was clear: $1 million in profit. I stared at the figures. There was no sudden surge of joy,
no urge to celebrate with champagne. I thought back to the boy standing in the festival crowd with a single tomato.
The profit was just numbers on a screen. The real victory was the iron resolve I had forged in the mud. I had built an empire, but the true growth was the man. I had become a man who no longer needed validation from those who had once looked through him. The charity gala was a sea of crystal and soft chatter, a world away from the dust of my fields. I moved through the room with the steady pace of a man who owned his space. I scanned the crowd and found her standing near the grand staircase. Clara looked exactly as she had that day at the festival, unaware of the years that had passed. I walked toward her, my footsteps silent on the marble. She turned, her eyes sweeping over me without a flicker of recognition. I stopped inches away. She offered a polite, distant smile.
The kind reserved for strangers who didn't matter. I tilted my head and spoke my name, Leo.
From the farm. The smile vanished. Her eyes widened, scanning my face, searching for the boy she had once dismissed. The confusion in her expression deepened, then collided with the reality of who stood before her. She took a half step back, her composure fracturing as the realization hit. The woman who had once looked through me was now staring, unable to reconcile the man in front of her with the memory of the joke she had laughed at. The air between us grew thick. Her initial shock gave way to a practiced, softening grace.
She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, inviting tone. Leo, I had no idea, she murmured, her gaze lingering on mine with a sudden, desperate warmth.
That day at the festival, I was young and foolish. I never meant to hurt you. She paused,
searching for a reaction, then added, we should catch up properly. Let me buy you a coffee.
The words hung there, a calculated bridge back to a past I had already abandoned. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw only the emptiness of a moment long dead. The apology did not feel like a victory. It felt like noise. The boy who had once craved this invitation had been buried under years of struggle and sweat. I realized in that heartbeat that her approval was not a prize. It was irrelevant. I offered a short, thin smile, not of malice, but of absolute indifference. I am far too busy for that, I said. I turned on my heel, leaving her standing alone by the stairs, and walked toward the exit without looking back. The drive back to the farm was long, but the silence inside the car was finally my own. I reached the gate long after midnight. The land was dark, smelling of damp earth and growth. I walked past the main barn and into the rows of soil I had turned with my own hands. I knelt in the dirt, the grit finding its way into my palms, and dug until my fingers found a firm, cool carrot. I pulled it free, wiped the loose soil against my leg, and took a bite. The crunch was sharp, clean, and real. It tasted like the seasons I had spent laboring in the heat and the storms. I looked out over the rows of crops stretching into the darkness. I had chased $1 million, but the money was just paper. The true prize was not in the bank, and it certainly was not in the eyes of anyone who had once laughed. The victory was the man who stood here now, built from nothing, sustained by his own sweat. I finished the carrot, stood up, and looked toward the horizon. The past was finished. The future was mine to plant.